The show's going to be a little different this season.
We are referring to this as Game of the Game. Well, the game is that there's a hat. In that hat, there are prompts. We do not know what these prompts say.
You and we both don't know what we're going to be talking about next episode. Cookie Pocket, the game of the game.
The game of the game of the game of the game of the game.
The game of the game.
Yeah, whatever anything has been. We had an ambiguously satisfied prompt with The Other Side of the Wind, and I fear I might have similarly ambiguously satisfied this prompt, if at all. But I was hesitant when choosing for this. The prompt was a war movie where the U.S. military are the villains. That's the text.
Americans.
Right? I'm remembering this correctly. Americans. Okay.
Yeah.
Even better. I think that helps a lot, actually. I tried to avoid reading like full synopses of anything before I watch it. As any listener knows by now, I'm very spoiler averse. But I sort of glanced at The Last Samurai. I had Googled and done my own internet searches to satisfy this, and the most obvious thing that kept showing up was Apocalypse Now and many other basically any Vietnam movie. And of course, we'd already done Apocalypse Now, and I didn't want to be that obvious. But I had Last Samurai like sitting around on disc already, and it struck me as shocking that we haven't had Tom Cruise on the podcast yet.
Never? Really?
So I could be wrong, but I was trying to remember if we had talked about any of the missions, any of the Top Guns, or
The Outsiders.
Spielberg. Okay, yes, okay. Yes, you got me. But he's in The Outsiders for like 2 minutes.
He just like burps a lot, I think.
Counts.
Yeah.
Yes, he has like brownie in the corner of his mouth the whole movie. But anyway, The Last Samurai. Edward Zwick has brought his epic war sentimentalism, and Zimmer's got a big old score, and it's 2.5 hours long. But what did you two make of this movie?
Well, I want to jump in and snip some of the tension here about your selection for the prompt. Because Mitchell and I were actually discussing that before the episode, and I think we came to the conclusion that we're not gonna the tribunal. Wait, a tribunal needs 3 people. The dubunal is not going to dole any punishment out upon you, because even though in this movie maybe the Americans aren't wholesale the villains, we came to the conclusion that it was a selection made for the prompt in good faith and fit the spirit of the prompt, if not necessarily fulfilling the exact.
We have some very liberal Supreme Court justices here.
Yes,
but I'll take
certainly on my side. I hope that
literally, they are not the antagonists.
I hope literally. Brett Kavanaugh and Clarence Thomas over here don't screw me over for Other Side of the Wind. But in terms of The Last Samurai, I thought it was okay. I think that you do have to go into it thinking of it as like a wholesale work of fiction, because I did a rudimentary amount of research afterward into this actual story, and the more digging you do, the more vaguely it's apparent that any of these characters are structured on real people, and stuff is moved around in time and made a lot more binary than it really was. But if you evaluate it just as kind of an early 2000s action vehicle, I think it's entertaining. Tom Cruise never really feels like a 19th century man. He kind of consistently just feels like action man. And I think some part of that is down to his haircut. He has this very flowy Hollywood locks, which you could say like, well, he's let himself go. He's not looking after his haircut. But I think of when Johnny Depp was in From Hell, the Alan Moore adaptation. He had similar kind of droopy, flowy hair. And Alan Moore said that wasn't true to the character at all. And in reality, that haircut would have gotten him beat up by the rest of the Metropolitan Police Force. And that echoed in my head while watching this. There are great fight scenes. It's a big epic film. It's very Hollywood. It doesn't get really too specific into the culture or the history behind it, but it's entertaining. And I think for the most part, it's not really a white savior movie, which is something people complain about this movie for. I think it's cited along with, Dances with Wolves, which this is similar to, if not totally identical, as like a typical white savior film. But for the most part, Cruise's character is kind of more of an observer than he is the intelligent modern white man who comes in and teaches these savages how to fight a modern war. That's not really the dynamic in this at all. Although at the end it gets a little po-faced, but I assume we'll talk about that later. It was a 3 out of 5 for me. I had fun.
Every time we watch something, I kind of want to have a more separate discussion about how it is we arrive at our numbers, even though I think at this point, all three of us feel similarly that the number doesn't matter very much, and that the substance of what we're saying or why we reacted to something is what matters more. But for this, I was definitely like teetering on the edge of a 4, but comparing it to Edward Zwick's other film, Glory, I found this to be a little lacking, in large part because I felt like he's doing much of the same things here that he does in Glory, but to a less great effect. And, at risk of turning this into a podcast about Glory, Glory is about the U.S. Civil War's first all-black volunteer company fighting the Confederates. And there's obviously so much there, just in that sentence. And the performances in that are great, and Denzel Washington won an Academy Award for it. And I think in The Last Samurai, it's not, which I enjoyed a lot, there's just, as a vehicle, there's not as much opportunity for the interpersonal conflict to be as compelling. And I think The Last Samurai, for me, was limited not as much by Tom Cruise's action hero disposition or even its length so much as by its predictability. Like I felt like maybe this is a function of it just being one of those dad movies where it's got like the almost like Braveheart-esque final battle and the like I mentioned before, the dramatic orchestral score. But other little things, like if you know the synopsis, you know that Algren is going to switch sides essentially once he becomes sort of immersed in the old way of the samurai. And like as soon as he woke up in the one house or abode with I don't know her name, but the wife of the man he had killed in the battle prior, I was like, oh, there's totally going to be a romance between them. Like it was just,
I did like that they kind of soft pedaled that though. That didn't become like a focus. It wasn't like an Avatar thing where at the end he seems to be fighting as much for the possibility of sex as for a cause that he believes in.
Sure. It's not gratuitous. And I still think her quickness to forgive him and her kids liking him as much as they do, and then the very, very ending being him returning to her is probably, I think we know what the next scene is after it fades to black, if you catch my drift.
They play
she was
frisbee.
Spending way too long. Yeah, they play baseball. They're playing way too long. She was putting on that cloak down there. You know what I'm saying? That was too long.
Yes.
Too long. Anyway, it's time for my opinion now. It's time for the opinion to drop. Christian was talking about some type of numbering scheme BS. I'm going to have to say that's probably correct, but sometimes I think a 3 is okay, and sometimes I think a 2 is okay. But you know what? That's fine, because numbers are just a social construct. I guess just like Samurai, if you really think about it.
Wait.
Yeah.
You made like half a good point, and so I went, oh, maybe. But now that I think about it, not really. I don't.
Maybe I'm just messing with Zach now. Anyway, I saw the top review for this was the last weeaboo, or the first weeaboo actually, and that's a fantastic review. This is what this is what happens to every anime kid when they go to Japan. They immediately get culturally immersed, and then they completely change their opinion about any way they grew up. They just completely write off ever being American, and that's like the least believable part of this whole film for me. Is that in combination of what Christian said, the family kind of just immediately turning over. Although I think for him, it's a lot more unrealistic just because of the experiences and trauma that he had and being in like such a culturally shifting war in the US. It's just kind of hard to believe that he would be like invested with them for, what was it, like months, maybe weeks? I forget exactly what he said. But even after months, it's like you're not going to immediately change all of your morals just because you spent time with like this one family and got trained up by them. But on the other hand, I mentioned in my review that it's part of the hero's journey. Like this is the trials and tribulations, and this is him kind of, training up and challenging his own morals, and then eventually, looking destiny right in the face pretty much by the end. So I think that's kind of the whole point, which is it's absolutely like one of the most overplayed plots in Hollywood ever, basically. But on the other hand, like Zach said, the action scenes are great. They're all super varied in location and size and scale and the people involved in them. And I think that's kind of rare, especially for a war film where you have all these different locations and vistas and everything. And it's almost like this kind of almost goes into our Braveheart discussion, like about the battle at the bridge and what everything was really like. But because they took those creative liberties, it also like shook up the setting a little bit. It shook up, what equipment they used and the drama of it. So I'd say I would apply the same logic to this, where it's like, only that this is like not directly based off of any historical event. It's kind of inspired by multiple events, basically very loosely inspired. But still, I think the creative liberties, if you'd call them that, are very well utilized in that sense. But yeah, there's no like major. This is not going to change your life. Okay, this is not gonna shake you to your core or anything. It's a pretty obvious dichotomy, and it's it's super entertaining to watch. But and I will also lend the hand to Hans Zimmer here. Lend the Hans to Hans Zimmer here, because he freaking crushes it, honestly. He literally maximizes every ounce of drama, and it's either he just goes overboard or he just hits the mark to the level where it's like, if you made this any louder or any more intense, I would walk out of the theater. And that's basically what he did here, where it's like everything was just, and the editing obviously is a huge part of that too. But it was just very well edited choreography. It was very well succinct scenes. It did not feel overlong at all. There's a very natural progression with everything. So there's really not a lot to complain about. And I would definitely give the half star to the action scenes, just because they definitely stand out of other Hollywood films, especially coming out at this time. I think I saw another review that said this was kind of this was either the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end when it comes to like big budget, inoffensive Hollywood films that everyone is like, oh, that was pretty good.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the action, because that too was what bumped me to the half star.
Yeah.
if we're going by numbers, and I find it, for me, the older I get, the less invested I am in just watching like a straight action scene. And we got into this quite a bit on Ballerina, I think.
Yeah.
That sort of weightless action with characters you care little or not at all about, even if it's choreographed perfectly, could be much less interesting or not interesting at all to sort of mid action choreographing to a story and characters you care a lot about. And for this, I don't know if I would say that I cared very much about Algren, but I do think the choreography was on that high tier. And if I didn't invest in Algren to the same extent that I did on the most character-driven, personally moving movie we watched here, it's still at least like a rung or two higher than Ballerina, to the point that action does work for me. And that 2.5 hour runtime really kind of, you get there, I think, but by the last half hour.
I will say,
and I'm glad you.
I was going to say, I do think for me the action sequences are well done. I'm not going to backpedal that, but I do think the kind of action and combat that they portray sometimes doesn't really feel appropriate for the kind of movie this is trying to be. I do think this is trying to be something more dramatic than it comes across as, because a lot of the fight scenes feel like there's something from like Pirates of the Caribbean. And this is, I don't necessarily think that sticking close to history or historical accuracy is too important for a movie. But I do think in a case like this, where like actual samurai combat, especially in this era, would not really have been what they depicted at all. People throwing their swords and, lots of swords clanging against each other in this very kind of Hollywood presentation. I mean, if you watch any Kurosawa samurai film, those, I think, pretty accurately depict what, according to most sources, a samurai battle would actually be, which is two guys kind of slowly sizing each other up, and then maybe like two sword movements and somebody's got a nasty slash. Now, that's not as exciting to portray here, but I do think all of the clang clang and rousing score by the same man who later, or maybe slightly earlier, I'm not sure when Black Pearl came out, did the score for Pirates of the Caribbean. It's kind of a tonal pull, and it especially, I think, to me, comes across there's a scene where Algren is going to visit Ken Watanabe's character, and he's followed by these three guys, and then he takes out a sword and he dispatches all of them, and he cuts the guy's head off, and he makes a cool pose, and it feels like something that's like from the Matrix or something, and it grates weirdly with this. I think before he cuts the last guy's head off, the guy even goes, "The samurai are finished," and it feels like something from a much sillier movie than this is trying to be.
Yeah, I don't know how I felt about that as I was watching it. Now that you're laying that out for me, I can see that. But I think while I was in it, I wasn't making that distinction as much, and I more so admired its sincerity almost to a fault. Like Mitchell was saying about the music being like as emotive as it could be without being ridiculous. And I don't know, other moments like when Tom Cruise is having his alcohol withdrawal moment, he's like, "Sake, sake, give me some freaking sake, I'm gonna
Bob.
die."
Can I call you Bob?
Yeah. And I don't know, there's so much sincerity to the point of self-embarrassment at times, but I really appreciate that in a time where I feel like movies tend to be more cynical or ironic, so as to avoid the criticism, if fair criticism we're laying out now, where we say, oh, maybe that was sensationalized or not tone perfect. And I do think that final battle at least hews closer to the sort of war epic, and by that point, I think you have a sense of the mortality and of the deaths like mattering, and that final exchange between Watanabe and Cruz being this sort of tragic but perhaps fitting cultural acceptance of why and how their endings must be different. I do want to ask you guys specifically about that. This movie sort of accepts the way of the samurai, in particular the sort of honorable death idea. If not seppuku, then death in battle, like for Watanabe's character. And at least in a lot of Akira Kurosawa's movies, he sort of challenges that notion of death as honor, and maybe there's more to living and life. Did it work for you guys that this sort of accepted the samurai way, or would you have liked to see that norm pushed more?
I think it works within the context of the film itself. But this is very much an outsider's romanticized view of the samurai. And so I think that's another reason to emphasize that this is fiction. Because another thing that I brought up before, Christian, you arrived here for recording, a lot of the samurai, this kind of depicts the samurai as if they're like a minority ethnic group who are being persecuted and unfairly treated. And that wasn't really the case. In reality, a lot of samurai were not fighting for their way of life as much as they were to continue and maintain the, some would argue, unjust, not even some would argue, many would nowadays argue the unjust privileges that they had before the Meiji Restoration. Things like not having to pay taxes, being able to kill peasants whenever they wanted to, without being challenged legally. And so I think when it comes to other movies, perhaps Japanese-made movies that are more critical of the typical way of the samurai, there can be some explanation there that a lot of the people that have championed these sort of conservative values of, honor and self-sacrifice in Japanese history, that's also come with a lot of bad stuff, and a lot of encouragement to do really negative things that have impacted the country in poor ways. I mean, not just the samurai in this era, but later during World War II, and Japan, the Japanese army kind of embraced a lot of the stereotypical values of the samurai in a way that could have been said to be manipulative and destructive and also bad for the country in the long run. Now, from an outsider's perspective, though, where the samurai kind of are just synonymous with values and traditionalism in the way, and, a love for the history of one's country in a way that, say, the Native Americans are in Dances with Wolves, I think it makes sense within this movie. But this premiered in Tokyo, actually. I would be super curious to hear what Japanese viewers at the time felt about it. I didn't find anything like that in my, vague research. I know, like, Ken Watanabe was positive about the film because there were complaints later about like whitewashing and an outsider's perspective and Tom Cruise being the lead, and he was like, oh well, it also was great representation for lots of Japanese actors and other Asian actors, which is true. He then says, like, before The Last Samurai, Japanese characters in American films just had buck teeth and carried cameras. And I don't necessarily think that's true. This didn't come out the year after Breakfast at Tiffany's, but it's, I think within the movie it works. Super curious to hear what people from actually Japan would say about it, though.
Ken Watanabe was also in Godzilla.
He was,
yes. Which also was very vaguely called a whitewashing movie.
Yeah,
which is,
yeah.
I mean, it's in LA, right? So it's
Ken Watanabe and
San Francisco.
I can't remember his name. The guy who plays his second in command. They are like the first actors in the Hollywood Asian phone book. If you need a samurai or a historical Asian character, you pick up the phone and you call them.
I would imagine that
Ken Watanabe is the decoy for Ra's al Ghul for like 2 minutes in Batman Begins.
Oh my god. Yeah, I would imagine anything with Tom Cruise in it is going to make Japan a lot of money. I think that's a pretty good assumption. Now I'm trying to remember what the question was. I think does the samurai thing, does it work? Yeah, so I guess with like every with
all good, man.
With every 20th century empire, weaponizing traditional values is kind of how the masses are appealed to. So that's kind of basically, it's kind of a false representation, like just falsely idealizing the history of Japan, and then kind of using that as justification to kind of imperialize. So I guess that, but yeah, I'm gonna agree with Zach on that point. Within the context of the film, it makes sense. In realistic practice, that doesn't make any sense at all. I think the tone, and this will segue into what Zach was talking about with it feeling like Pirates of the Caribbean. I think it's the themes are pretty level with the amount of dramatic flair in the action, because a lot of the moseying and falling and buffoonery shenanigans that go on with Jack Sparrow are segues into the next action scene in the first 3 Pirates movies, the only 3 Pirates movies, dare I say. And I think this film does not have that at all. I think that's kind of the missing piece for me, where that doesn't necessarily apply. But I do see what you're saying with kind of the frantic slashing and the slight dramatic touches, and like when it's his son, right? Is it his son that dies, or his son-in-law or brother-in-law, son-in-law that dies on the bridge, and it's like smoky in the background and stuff.
Yeah,
like I think that generally matches the tone of the film. I think if that scene lasted a second longer, it would have been too long. But I also think with that, it's not overplayed to the point where it's like this is a total false representation of like any type of battle. Like, this is not believable. I'm gonna turn this off. Not like that level of like disdain, right? Because I just think like Zach said, going into it knowing it's a fictional film will pay back in spades, because if you're just looking at it as like, oh, these aren't like samurai, this is just an oppressed minority that has the samurai culture vaguely in and they're like vaguely representing the samurai culture, like with that lens, you're good. But if you're looking at it as like, I don't want to call anybody out, but some recency bias with Kurosawa out here. I'm just saying, maybe there's a lot that feels like it's missing, or a lot of directions that could have been gone in that didn't. And instead, it kind of just opted for the popcorn and the money instead of the deeply emotional, cultural discussions. And I think that's the major difference. But it's very consistent. And like we said, it's very entertaining, so it's not really a major concern. But I wouldn't go as far as to say it's entertaining to the point of like a Disney film, where it's like you already know why you're going into it. There's no question as to what you're watching. It's like clearly not historically accurate. It's vaguely using this era to have like Jack Sparrow say funny thing and enemies say funny thing and pirates stab each other and do piratey things. That's what Pirates is about. But this is like bing bop boom. This is the log line, hero's journey, and I think that's different. That's my point.
I do wonder if I think a lot of what makes you side with the samurai in this movie is all down to presentation. I do wonder if they tweaked it just a little to be a little more historically accurate, and the samurai use guns like they actually did at this point. And they wore modern military uniforms like they sometimes also actually did instead of their traditional armor. I do wonder if just those 2 tiny changes keep everything else the same. I do wonder if you would watch this film, or anybody would watch this film, and have the same inclination to automatically root for the samurai. Because I do think it's those elements of like the traditionalism and what we recognize about Japan, the stereotypical things that we associate with Japan, being attached to this group who's portrayed as being persecuted. I think it immediately triggers something in the viewer's mind that makes you go, oh, well, that's the real Japan that they're suppressing. When in reality, it was, it was all the real Japan. It was people being pulled in all kinds of different directions. Nothing is that black and white. But I do wonder if those 2 tiny changes would totally shake up how people came out of this movie feeling.
I think in the similar vein, like with Native American films, that would kind of be a very similar thing, because Native Americans also used guns.
Yes.
Although there are some films that depict that, but for the most part, most part, they they don't depict them like that. It's like, I guess, if it doesn't fit in the cookie cutter narrative, if it does not fit in the box, it will not be put in
the pocket.
If the cookie does not fit in the pocket, then it will not work.
And it's a compelling cookie cutter. Like in the film, I totally accepted like, oh, okay, they didn't use guns. And then afterward, I kind of read that they did, and I thought, wait a minute, like the samurai had guns forever. Like they used guns in Ron. Like they had guns for centuries at this point.
But it's all about, like,
believe that? But it's
what
compelling.
Is the audience? What is the expectation? Like what are the people with the most money buying the most tickets?
Yeah.
What audience is gonna enjoy this? And that's who it's marketed towards.
Yeah.
Not to say that Americans are just bumbling and dumb, or that this is like a completely dumb, false execution, right? It there has to be some level of truth to it in order for it to be appealing, and it does have to be relatable. So it's a generically relatable film. I mean, maybe that's if there's positive reception in Japan, that would be the explanation for it, is that they don't look at it like that either. They very much look at it like just a good versus evil, basically. And then that would make a lot more sense considering recency bias for them, because historically, obviously, anything remotely imperial is going to be frowned upon nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I think any movies, especially any big studio films, representation of a different culture, and that's not like just confined to films that are produced here in America. Like any nation's big studio production portrayal of a different culture is usually, I think, going to be viewed by that people of that culture who are going to go, what is this? Like if you watch any Japanese-made Godzilla film and there's a scene set in America, it's like watching a scene set on a different planet. It's and there's an element of like, do they think that's what New York is like? Or it's just that cultural gap.
Yeah, the common Chinese propaganda for Americans is widely considered awesome on the U.S. military side, because they depict us as absolutely blowing crap up all the time and being really loud and gruff and being like, we have to kill all of them. Like, yeah, let's go, let's get them.
Yeah, wow. I do think it's important to note like the whole audience expectation thing, because while of course there's many historical inaccuracies here, it still doesn't push the inauthenticity to the breaking point of sincerity. Like, I think a common example of this in Hollywood movies from maybe not as much now, but from decades ago, like if it's set in the Middle East, you'd get like the lens flare and the shimmering heat wave and the like soprano throat singing and like the scene where they're like bustling through a bazaar and they're like being offered wares, and we don't quite reach that point of self-parody, I think, which is for the best. Do you guys think that something made on this level of historical inaccuracy, but schmaltz, but stakes, and this like, I don't know, this soup of sincerity and 2.5 hours of action and drama, do you think this would play well in a theater today if it were coming out this year?
I don't think it would be made like this.
I think this is a question Zach doesn't want me to ask, but
I don't think it would be made like this. If it were to come out now. I mean, I will say, even though Nathan Algren is a totally fictional character, the concept of, white influencers, white instructors who were sent to Japan to help modernize the military, staying behind and fighting for the samurai. That did actually happen. There are historical records of a couple of different French guys who did that. Who not mutinied, went AWOL, I suppose the term might be, and joined with the samurai forces, and then eventually just made their way back to France and were like, yeah, it didn't work out. So, it's not like that's an entire fabrication. I do think, even though in the movie, Tom Cruise is not the last samurai, that title is a reference to the group of samurai. I do think the movie is certainly marketed to make you think he's the last samurai, or at least to make it easy for you to think that, if that's something that would interest you in watching the movie. You see a poster that says The Last Samurai, and it shows Tom Cruise in samurai armor with a sword looking into the sunset. It's easy for viewers to go, oh, well, I guess that's him. That's the last one. So I guess the point that I'm circling is, I don't think it would be made this way today. And even if it was, I certainly don't think it would be marketed this way, the way that it was, at least. I think if they were to make this movie today, which maybe they could without too many alterations, I doubt it would play, because people don't really go to the cinema to see anything other than recognizable IP anymore at this point. Or if they do, it's pretty rare. But I think today, if they were to put this same movie out, every poster would feature Cruise and Ken Watanabe. I think they'd be very keen to push both of them. Because I do think that angle of white guy stays behind and assists this culture that he's become, kind of ingrained in. I think that's still compelling, and I think people would still find interest in that. And I think that's still an acceptable inroad to this concept. But I don't think he'd be as much the central focus. But I think studios would still say, well, you need him there. But then again, Shogun just did really well on AMC, and I don't think that really has any white characters at all. And it's mainly subtitled. So I don't know. Maybe it's possible that this story would play without any need for a white character at all. I mean, in reality, in the actual Satsuma rebellions that this is based on, there was not, none of those French guys were there. That was like a couple of years earlier. So maybe it would work without Tom Cruise. But I think he would be made less central, or maybe not even there.
I think if they made him less central, they would just take him out. If it's Tom Cruise, to be honest.
Yeah, he doesn't do non-central anymore.
Oh yeah, he'd be a different actor. I'm trying to think of who they could maybe get. The guy who is an Upgrade might be good. I don't know if you guys ever saw that. He's kind of I think he'd be able to sell like, I am a listless, drunken, hopeless man, and I have been given new life by this movement. Maybe better than Cruise does, because I think that's some of the most awkward stuff in the movie when he's trying to pull that off. But
I think there would be, bro's got to take off the Halloween costume. I think that's what's got to happen, because I think that would be, he wouldn't get canceled. He is too big for that now, but I feel like they wouldn't take, I don't think production would take a chance on that, to be honest. I think at anything that's remotely culturally appropriating anything, even if there's an in story explanation for it, I still don't think it would make. I don't think they would go with that. I think
he'd have to be offered it like verbally by somebody with like high authority within the narrative.
That might make more sense.
Ken Watanabe would have to go, here you go, rather than like them kind of just looking at it and then him walking out of the house with it on.
Yeah, that is true. That would be more acceptable. I just honestly, I think, kind of also mentioning Shogun, I think just having an all Asian cast and just focusing on the actual historical accuracy is a little bit more applicable to the types of war films we've seen recently.
Yeah.
Where it's definitely about the dark doom and gloom realism. And there'd be a lot of wide shots and a lot of super close-ups and not a lot in between, probably. But I don't see this level of drama. Like I was kind of saying, this being the beginning of the end, out of the beginning, I feel like this type of hero's journey film this would not do well. And also, like you said, with it not being a recognizable IP, I just think, I think it would be shot down.
Yeah, I think Shogun is a good point, Zach, because I think this sort of longer both in runtime, but just in scope. I think television, or at least streaming, tends to be the more typical venue for this sort of thing now. Like, I don't think Shogun would probably have as much success as a theatrical release.
No, yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed it. I'm glad it exists. I'm sort of running out of things to say about it, but I, Tom Cruise is here.
Did you enjoy
Any final thoughts?
Isn't her name Taka? I think her name is Taka. Something like that. It starts with a T.
Sure.
she stabbed one of the ninjas. Did you enjoy that, Christian?
Oh yes, of course. How could I not?
That was me.
We've got to get like that one like slight dose of overcoming the like traditional masculine feminine roles just for like 2 seconds.
It's a fun movie. I think if you check it out, you'll be entertained. It is kind of long, but so many movies that people like watch for just quote unquote turn off your brain entertainment are like 4 hours nowadays. So 2.5 hours. I think it's more substantive than a lot of stuff of its caliber that gets made today. And then I'd encourage reading up on the actual history of it, because I do think it's really interesting, the actual story behind it. It's just not really what's represented here. But I mean, you mentioned ratings at the beginning, Christian. I gave this a 3 out of 5. And that's not always 3 out of 5 is like my good, okay, middle of the road rating, but that's not always a bad thing, because I have watched 4-star movies that I enjoyed less than 3-star movies. And that's a conversation for a whole other episode on the concept of grading a film on a objective scale, but it's fun. It's more fun than you might have with a bigger, more portentous film.
I also want to mention the dialogue was fairly substantive the whole time. It was pretty engaging interactions, and the purposeful switching of language, and as Tom Cruise gets more in tune with the Japanese phrases.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was pretty interesting. Maybe a little bit unrealistic, but cultural immersion can go a long way, I hear, when it comes to language learning. So, fairly believable. But I thought that was pretty engaging. And then his buddy calling him the president, that was pretty good.
Oh yeah.
The little comedic moments. Those are like pretty, I would say pretty bold, but fairly bold to kind of insert into all of this dramatic flair when Hans Zimmer is going crazy in the background, and you're like, all right, before he goes crazy, we got to throw in this little gag. We got to throw in this little sketch. So that's something to be appreciated too. And then we mentioned the easing off the romance part.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a lot of directions the film really could have gone that would have kind of thrown it into the bargain bin at Blockbuster. But I really think it stands out, especially with this long runtime. So yeah, 3.5.
I was amused to see that John told the cinematographer on this shot The Thin Red Line and also Tropic Thunder.
This reminded me of The Thin Red Line with, and there was a lot of slow motion that was used in Thin Red Line as well.
They totally hired him for Tropic Thunder. Like, that's a good choice. They totally knew what they were doing there too.
Yeah.
He was not just slumming on that job. I'm sure that was a deliberate hire.
Yeah.
So awesome. I was thinking about our double feature and how the guys in Sorcerer are driving the trucks to get $2,000, and how in Better Off Dead, the kid riding the bike wants his $2. So they're it's kind of like a perfect double feature.
Between $2
connection. It's about desperation.
Yeah. between $2 and $2,000, destiny will always find you, and then you commit seppuku.
So it's a triple feature.
Oh no.
It's all tied together now.
Yeah, I guess do we want to talk about our double feature?
Yes. Christian, kick it off.
Yeah, you described this movie.
Okay.
Describe.
Fine. Well, okay. So we knew we were going to watch Sorcerer, and the question was what to pair with it. And I asked, do we want like a traditional double feature that like made sense, or did we want something out of left field? And Mitchell said out of left field, so I thought,
Can I just ask, what would your traditional pick have been? What did we miss out on? Can we see the other case on Deal or No Deal?
I didn't get that far, Zach. I would have had something good. But
we got the $1.
I'll answer that question at a later date. Yeah.
So I opened the other door and it was a brick wall, Christian. Is that what you're telling me right now?
That door required time that I did not.
They didn't finish the building the set.
Invest.
Yeah.
Yes. I would have come up with something and it would have been good. I have a plan. Just elect me first.
You have concepts of a plan.
Yes. Better Off Dead is insane. I thought it would be funny, and it was a little funny, but definitely not as funny as I remembered it. And I purchased this movie a few years back because it wasn't streaming, and it starred John Cusack in like a high school, ostensibly romantic comedy. And I kind of thought, hey, this will be like Say Anything, but slightly less good, but that's okay because I like this stuff. And instead, it's just kind of, as Mitchell described it while we were watching it, like a series of Family Guy cutaway gags. And there's sort of like loosely a romantic story that resolves itself at the end, but it's not like worth anything. It won't move you. You won't really be invested in how it ends. Dan Schneider's in it because why not? And he's very creepy in it. And there's a stop motion hamburger dancing to Van Halen. I shouldn't have said that because, the joy of this movie is just discovering it and letting it wash over you. But I went from a 4 to a 3 on it, and a 3 is probably still kind. But, it's one day I will choose a movie night for us that won't be like objectively mediocre movies. We went from New Mutants to this. I don't know what else, but I pledge to do better next time.
Well, so I will say I didn't like Better Off Dead. I gave it a 2 out of 5. That said, I did a little bit of reading about the movie and about Savage Sid Holland, I think is the director, and that's his legal name.
Steve.
He directed this movie, and he directed another movie with John Cusack called like One Hot Summer or something like that. One Crazy Summer, maybe. And apparently on the set of One Crazy Summer, John Cusack saw a rough cut of Better Off Dead and confronted Holland about it and said, that movie sucked. It's one of the worst things I've ever been in, and I will never trust you again as a director. But apparently Holland later went on to mainly work on like animated stuff for like Cartoon Network, and I can see that gives me a little bit of appreciation for Better Off Dead in hindsight, because it feels like the work of an artist in the wrong medium. So many of the gags that just play as kind of slow and awkward and ill-timed in live action in Better Off Dead feel like something that would totally work in an animated film in the style of like Ren and Stimpy or something like that. I specifically, I think of like his mom, who's weirdly obsessed with gross food, that they just can't quite realize how that's meant to look in live action, but in animation that could look like anything they want. When the tapioca pudding like crawls off his plate and away across the table, that's a total animated gag that would work in animation, where when it's just kind of weirdly pulled by a string and is clearly of a totally different texture than it was a second ago when it hit the plate, it just plays as strange. Stuff like the thing with the mountain, where they're on top of the mountain in like an instant. You can play that in a cartoon where it doesn't really play as naturally in live action. So yeah. I didn't like Better Off Dead, but like I think I understand now what the director was trying to do, and it seems that he's found more success in animation now, which seems to me at least a more fitting medium for his sense of humor.
And there's the intro scene that's actually animated.
Yeah.
And then you have the paper drawing that John Cusack actually drew on the paper that's animated. And then you have 2 stop motion scenes with the burgers The latter of which was right after Zach said, "Oh, this scene will have a point," or whatever he said specifically. But like, wait, this scene will like actually close out. Things will actually have happened, and then it immediately cuts to the burgers dancing, and I was like, "Oh no!" Yeah, I appreciate that insight, Zach, because now that makes sense to me as well. I think I think also just it's easier to iterate on gags and to have the same gags over again in animation, and to kind of redo and kind of reuse the same animations from a literal practical standpoint, and also just from a writing standpoint, because it makes it instantaneously funnier a lot of the time, for most, majorly popular cartoons. But at the same time, it's just this time it's just played over and over again, and it's like it's supposed to be played like a surprise, like, oh, guess what, we're bringing it back again. You didn't think we'd do it again, but we did it again. And then they do it again. You're like, you really didn't think I was going to do it a third time, but it happened a third time. Like, the food is gross again. And that iteration, like, now there's like tentacles in it. It's like, okay, that's just, what am I supposed to feel right now? Like, it's fine. It's not a focus of the scene. Like, it's a background thing, but it's like what I kind of alluded to in my review, it ruins the whole satire of like the teen rom-com 80s feel to it. And it's really lame that the way in which that message was just kind of cut to pieces and thrown about in a variety of gags, instead of like an actual, like, we're gonna wrap this up now, and like this is like an actual satire where we're like focusing on all these cliches, and the characters are written in that way, and everyone kind of fits this archetype pretty easily, and they all have their own little things about them. But in this, it's like every character has like one or two quirks to them, but usually only one of them is on display at a time. It's just very, very thin. It's all just to support whatever the gag is for that scene. So that's kind of what made it unfortunate. But I do appreciate the messaging, and I appreciate what it was trying to do, especially when films that were rom-coms at that time were extremely popular, and that's a very big kahuna to put a target on at the time. So it's somewhat bold in that way. But yeah, this is 100% that belongs in an animated medium.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up the tentacle claw monster in the pot that the mom is cooking at one point. In animation, that's a funny one-off gag that you could do fluidly in the background, and then we move on to focus on something else when John Cusack enters the kitchen. But in live action, when it's this weird herky-jerky puppet that looks like a prop straight out of Athelton High School's production of The Tempest, it pulls all the focus. Like so the scene just can't move on because it's not fluid. It doesn't look natural. It's not something your brain is just willing to look past and move on from the way it would be in an animated film. And it's like, I don't know. It becomes like somebody like took a dump on the counter, and like you can't have a conversation because there's a dump on the counter right there. Why is the scene happening? Isn't anybody going to do anything?
Wow. I knew you didn't like it, but man. Ouch. Well, Sorcerer was much better. Yeah. I don't know how much time we have to talk about Sorcerer. But Sorcerer was Kino, man. And I had watched The Wages of Fear, which is the original film adaptation of this story, about 24 years before Sorcerer. I watched that like the day before Sorcerer, and I still enjoyed Sorcerer. I wasn't at all bored, and it didn't feel perfunctory. It's very different from the original. Surprisingly, I think it does less to distinguish its characters. But the synopsis being that these guys have to drive trucks of nitroglycerin so far to make a certain amount of money to escape this backwater town where they just are basically dying and not wanting to live. There's so much tension in that conflict already, but Friedkin pushed it to its absolute limit on these like crazy rope bridges, and just like you will shout involuntarily when you watch this, as I did. And it's a great group choice for that reason.
Yeah, I think the setup, the setup was almost, I'm gonna say it's like a red herring. It pretty much is a red herring because tonally and just how long the scenes are, I guess, the pacing, it feels like it's going to be a lot bigger than it really is. They all kind of just end up in the same place dealing with the same singular task for the rest of the film, where it feels like, oh, this is like, there's like some grand like multinational scheme going on.
Yeah.
And how are they all going to like interact? Are they all going to like go in on a big job together? Or, but instead it's like the opposite. They all get thrown into the absolute squalor, the town, just absolutely in like the worst possible state, escaping, you know, they're with literal Nazis, or at least one confirmed, other one suspected Nazi war criminals. And it kind of just, and you know that they're genuinely bad people that have like evil, you know, have conducted evil, that are scheming on how they can do better on the next job. But in this case, it's like all that is focused on this one task, just to make a couple thousand, and that's that in and of itself is a little bit jarring, but it totally pays off once you actually get into the role of it.
Yeah, I really like how you nodded to, Mitchell, that all of these characters are kind of like bad people. There's a moment where Roy Scheider's character thinks that the two other members of their party who were driving the other truck, he thinks that they have died on this rickety bridge, that they couldn't have made it over. And his like default reaction is like, we get more money now. Let's get to the end of the line. And I do really like that it kind of, the movie reduces these characters to just base human nature. There's a big aspect of this film, I think, is just about sweat and grime and effort, and it's real kind of primordial stuff that anybody can relate to some extent. I mean, you know, I don't think any of us have driven cars full of explosives, but we've all been on a road we were a little uncomfortable with, in traffic that we were tense about. And so, you know, we've had to do a job in heat that was not fun. And so this kind of just cranks all of those relatable things up to 1,000, where, oh, well, you know, you had difficulty driving through DC at 5 p.m. Well, now you got to go over a rope bridge that's going to collapse at any second. And there's something really relatable in that. I do think, like Mitchell nodded to, I enjoyed it more on this rewatch than I did the first time I watched it, because the first time you watch it, the first maybe 40 minutes of the film or so are just all of our different characters, our four different leads. And then there's a little kind of establishment of the town in their own places in the world. And it's about how they end up in this town in South America. But for those first 40 minutes, as you're being introduced to all these people, there's a real element of, when you're watching it, of like, okay, what's his name? Okay, and he did this. Okay, I'll have to remember that. But a lot of that you really don't need to remember. You kind of just need to know that these are four guys and they're in a bad situation and they're trying to get out of it. And I think there's something really entertaining about that. This Sorcerer, when it first came out, tanked at the box office because they were going up against a rinky-dink little science fiction movie that nobody expected anything from, made by a friend of ours named George. And so it rather predictably got blown out of the water by Star Wars. But I don't think that's any poor reflection on the film, because I don't think this is just like a dad movie. I do think you could get basically anybody together in a room, and if they like exciting films, I do think that they would be really gripped by this. I think it holds up well. Some people might find it difficult to get over all the different languages and subtitles, but I think people who complain about subtitles are a lost cause. So
yeah, for the most part, I get it, because I do want, to me, it's not like I won't watch a movie if there's subtitles, but you do inevitably end up observing the picture a little less. So you've got to learn how to speed read. But yes, I know we're probably going to preview our next thing, but I see Justices Kavanaugh and Thomas are entering the room.
Oh no!
So, yes. So Zach had a prompt, and Zach did not meet the letter, the textualist understanding of this prompt. So, Zach, we found you guilty of not satisfying this prompt.
After the goodwill that we extended to you for the last samurai.
Zach, it's our term now. You are fired.
This is retribution.
And all I'll say is you will be sentenced in our next recording, and that's all I have to say.
What? We said
You can't
that to be
postpone
the next
anything.
week.
No,
you can't keep dragging me out like this.
No. You know how the court works. Things get postponed.
Yes,
it's in the Constitution.
Yes.
I am due a fair and speedy
Exigent
trial.
circumstances.
Speedy is like as speedy as
Speedy's like 90 days.
Yeah.
You know.
In
Whatever.
government.
It's been like 90 days since our last recording. But
Yes.
Don't exaggerate.
Well, it won't be a
things.
grievous punishment, Zach, but we felt some responsibility to
We're gonna
set
find
the
you in
standard.
contempt if you keep saying anything, Zach. You better settle down.
okay, all right. I mean, I don't know why I'm really fighting for my mulligans. I said I wasn't going to use them, but
The sergeant at arms is going to throw you out if you don't settle down.
well,
With
I
your
I
guess,
have no clue
nonsense.
who picks the prompt next, but
I guess as I
Is it-
stew in my imminent sentencing, it's Mitchell's turn to draw a prompt from the hat.
That's interesting. A film that was directed by someone who is not primarily known as a director.
Oh, okay.
I feel like Christian would say primarily known.
who's to say?
And Zach said,
Well,
"Oh, okay."
I'm
So
to
that
say
kind of
that I
sealed
didn't
the
write
deal.
those prompts.
That also clarifies. Does Christian know who wrote the last prompt?
That's a good
That's
point,
the real
yeah.
question.
Well, I don't know why we were so cagey about it last time, but
I'm pretty sure I know who wrote the last prompt.
Okay, who did? Who did?
It was Mitchell.
oh, okay. All right.
Okay, all right. Because
Yeah,
me and Zach were
okay.
like, we talked about this. We're like, wait a minute, it could go both ways.
Because my reaction
would be
when
something
you
that
said
Zach
"I
says.
wonder who" was I thought you were fastening onto America as the antagonist and thought that's Zach all over. That hippie.
No. I it's just because Mitchell's such a war movie guy. I think if you're a casual, like if you don't actually know us, you'd be like, oh yeah, Zach hates America. This is
But just by assumption, you just think that he's just that type of guy. He's that type
But
of
if
guy.
if you really know, you're like, oh yeah, this is Mitchell. Mitchell's being creative, but he wants a war movie. Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
The game of the game of the game of the game of the game.